Thanks for staying with us now. As promised, the news in detail. Let's begin in Iran, which has announced a further scaling back of compliance with obligations under the 2015 nuclear deal with world powers. Iran's nuclear spokesman said Tehran will increase uranium production and enrichment, breaking its stockpile limit within 10 days. He said Tehran may export heavy water, and that will not be in violation of the accord. Iran stressed there is still time for European powers to protect it from U.S. sanctions, but they need to act, not just talk. This comes after the EU reaffirmed support for the 2015 deal, as well as a new payment mechanism to circumvent U.S. sanctions. The pact's status has been precarious since the U.S. pulled out last year and toughened its sanctions against Tehran. Well, Russia has warned against baseless accusations leveled at Iran over attacks on commercial tankers in the Gulf of Oman. The Kremlin called for a calm appraisal of the situation until there is more evidence. Saudi Arabia and the U.S. blame Iran for the attacks in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's busiest oil shipping routes. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Tehran's involvement in last week's attacks is unmistakable. He says the oil tankers are proof of Iranian intent to restrict shipping in the Strait of Hormuz.
We're going to guarantee freedom of navigation throughout the Strait. This is an international challenge. This is important to the entire globe. The United States is going to make sure that we take all the actions necessary, diplomatic and otherwise, that achieve that outcome.
On to India now, where at least 70 people have died because of a 45-degree heat wave in the eastern state of Bihar. Over 30 patients are still undergoing treatment. The worst-hit district in the state is Aurangabad, where some 30 people have died so far. 20 people have died in Gaya and 10 in Nawada district. The situation has been worsened by an acute water and power crisis. Most South Asian countries, including Pakistan and Bangladesh, have been struck by heat waves this summer. At least 30 people have been killed in a suicide bombing by Boko Haram militants in northeast Nigeria. 40 others were wounded in that attacks. 3 suicide bombers detonated their explosives outside a location where football fans were watching a match on TV. For over a decade, Boko Haram and other militia have been waging a battle in the region. As a result, more than 30,000 people have been killed and millions have been displaced. Moving on to Sudan, where ex-President Omar al-Bashir has been charged with corruption-related offenses during his first trial since his overthrow in April. Bashir was charged with incitement and involvement in the killing of protesters. Sudan's former president appeared in public for the first time since he was removed by a military coup. The chief prosecutor says corruption cases have been opened against 41 former officials of Bashir's administration. Elsewhere, Yemen's Houthi rebels have launched a fresh drone attack, on Abha airport in southern Saudi Arabia. It comes after the Saudi-led coalition hit rebel positions in Yemen following multiple drone attacks on 2 Saudi airports in Jazan and Abha. Yemeni Houthi rebels and the Saudi-led coalition have been engaged in tit-for-tat attacks since last week. The situation worsened when Houthi airstrikes wounded 26 people at Abha airport last Wednesday. Pakistan has been a frontline country in the fight against terrorism. It has sacrificed thousands of lives and has suffered the loss of billions of dollars fighting terrorism, mostly triggered by insurgents from its western border with Afghanistan. After multiple military operations, millions displaced and repatriated, peace has finally been restored to the border areas of North Waziristan in the country's northwest. Pakistan's armed forces, in collaboration with local authorities, are now taking measures to ensure lasting peace and normal life to these areas. For more now on that story, we're now joined by our correspondent, Sumaira Khan, who is joining us now from North Waziristan. Sumaira, thank you for joining us. What can you tell us, Sumaira, about the history of this area and what it has been brought through and what brought back peace to it?
Yes, I must tell you first about North Waziristan that this particular agency which is now part of the tribal system, but the entire tribal system is now part of Pakistan. And first it was FCR which was implemented in these 7 agencies, and amongst these 7 agencies, North Waziristan is one of them. So first of all, we used to call it North Waziristan Agency, but since after the merger of the entire belt into province, now it's North Waziristan district of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So the merger process is right now underway, and right now there is obviously quite complications linked to that merger process as well. But the area is quite vibrant in its history. It's a hardcore tribal area that was earlier handled by the tribal elders, and there was entirely a different system in place. There was no judiciary system that was linked to the other parts of the country, and so there was altogether a different system that we used to call it a tribal system and jirga system. So now everything is changing gradually, but the agency's dynamics and other linked complicated matters, they still need to be resolved, as the local administration is trying to curtail the both systems right now at the same time, parallel systems. But I think this seems to be still difficult for the local administration as of now.
Sumaira, then what steps have been taken to repatriate the population? You have been, of course, here in the past. Have you noticed anything different yourself?
Yes, there is a drastic difference. I must mention one thing, that before the army, the military operation took place in the area back in 2014. In particularly, if I talk about North Waziristan, the major military operation took place in June 2014, in which there was a large number of tribally displaced persons, and the term used for them was PDPs, and they were relocated in other parts of the country. Primarily, they were relocated in Banu area, and that camp was called Baka Khel camp. Right now, the situation is quite different in here. The law and order situation is much better. Normalcy is here. We cannot see any more terrorist outfits, and we did not see in the entire in the whole visit. We didn't come across any terrorist hideout, or you can say that any because prior to the military operation in this area, there was a general perception that the area is totally being controlled by the militant elements, and obviously one of the militant elements was Pakistan, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan at that time. But now we can say that with all the satisfaction after visiting the vicinity.
Very well. Thank you very much, Sumaira Khan. That was Sumaira Khan, our correspondent, speaking to us there from North Waziristan. Let's move on now. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has inaugurated a new settlement in the occupied Golan Heights in honor of U.S. President Donald Trump. Netanyahu unveiled a Trump Heights sign to mark the site of the new settlement. The ceremony comes 3 months after Trump recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, seized from Syria in the 1967 war. Israel later annexed the area in a move never recognized by the international community. The construction is planned in an area occupied by 4 settler families. At least 8 people have been killed as a migrant boat sank off Turkey's western coast. The Coast Guards have said 31 others have been rescued. Search and rescue operations launched by the Coast Guard are still underway. The boat was carrying 40 migrants. Turkey became one of the main launch points for migrants taking the sea route into EU territory. On to Syria, where at least 12 people have been killed in a rocket attack by rebels in the northwest of the country. War monitors say 5 children are among those killed in the attack. At least 15 others have been wounded in a similar attack in the south of Aleppo city. This comes 2 days after 34 people were killed in fighting between government forces and rebel fighters in Idlib. The clashes in the country's northwestern provinces have claimed over 360 lives since late April. The United Nations said the fighting displaced nearly 300,000 in May alone. Well, at least 10 people have been killed by fires engulfing wheat fields in Syria's northeastern Hasakeh province. War monitors say civilians and members of the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces were among the victims. Kurdish authorities claim the fires were set deliberately. The Kurds and the Damascus regime are competing to buy up this year's harvest. But fires, some claimed by ISIS, are destroying crops in the country's breadbasket. The Kurdish Agriculture Authority says the largest fires have ravaged 350,000 hectares of land. Contenders to replace Theresa May have clashed over delivering Brexit during a TV debate in the UK. The MPs argued over the prospects of a no-deal Brexit and whether a new deal could be renegotiated with the EU.
5 candidates for Prime Minister faced off in the first TV debate of a Tory leadership contest. There were differing opinions on a no-deal Brexit and how to proceed on the issue. The leadership hopefuls turned their fire on favourite Boris Johnson, who stayed notably absent. Contenders questioned Johnson's pledge to leave the EU by the end of October, no matter what.
We've been talking about Brexit for 25 minutes now. And where is Boris? If his team won't allow him out to debate with 5 pretty friendly colleagues, how's he going to fare with 27 European countries? He should be here to answer that very question.
International Development Secretary Rory Stewart called proroguing Parliament a disturbing option. He described the contest as a competition of machismo.
The fundamental issue here is that there's a competition of machismo. Everybody's saying, I'm tougher. Genuinely, every time I have this debate, everyone's like, trust me, I'm going to do it. I'm the guy, I can defeat the impossible odds. And I'm accused of being a defeatist by trying to be realistic.
Home Secretary Sajid Javid warned against delivering Brexit by trashing the democracy.
When it comes to Nigel Farage, look, I don't underestimate him as a politician. He's had great success in recent weeks, as we've seen. But delivering on something as important as Brexit should be the job of the elected government of the people.
Ex-Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab stated that it was a mistake to take no deal off the table, whereas Environment Secretary Michael Gove ensured of getting a different deal from the EU. The final pair candidates will be put to a vote of the 160,000 members of the Conservative Party from June 22nd.
Russia says accusations it meddled in the European Union elections are absurd. An official from the Russian Security Council says there is no convincing evidence to validate European claims. The statement comes 2 days after the European Union released a report reviewing the elections. The report is the latest in a string of Western allegations accusing Russia of using online disinformation to influence voters. Moscow has repeatedly denied the claims. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras has warned Turkey over its drilling activities in the eastern Mediterranean. He stressed that a violation of Greece and Cyprus's sovereign rights and international law might result in sanctions. Tsipras stated if the drilling is verified, Greece and Cyprus will push their European partners to penalize Turkey. A Turkish drill ship has been anchored west of Cyprus since May. Cyprus and Greece have alleged that the vessel is encroaching into their exclusive economic zone. Turkey, however, insists that the area is on its continental shelf. Earlier, southern EU leaders denounced Turkey over the gas dispute with Cyprus. Early results from Guatemala's presidential election show the center-left candidate Sandra Torres is leading the race. With returns from 20% of polling stations counted, the former First Lady secured over 23% of the vote. Conservative Alejandro Yamatia followed Torres with 15.7%. 19 candidates are competing in the race for the presidency. If no candidate gets more than 50% in the first phase, the top 2 candidates will contest a second round on August 11th. Nearly 800 undocumented migrants have been detained in eastern Mexico. The detention is one of the biggest swoops on illegal immigration in recent months. Mexico's National Migration Institute says the foreign nationals were found in 4 trucks. Mexico has stepped up efforts to reduce the surge of migrants heading for the U.S. border as part of a deal to avoid American trade tariffs. Most people caught up entering the United States are fleeing poverty and violence in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. In France, moon rocks collected during the Apollo 11 mission are on display in Paris. The exhibition coincides with the 50th anniversary of the Apollo missions.
Usually dull grey in color, moon rocks are unremarkable in appearance, but they hold great value for planetary scientists. France has put its own share of NASA's collection at a science museum in Paris.
In 1969, France finally asked the US if we could have a permanent sample in the country. Very quickly, the US offered us these samples, which were very quickly put on display at the Palais de la Découverte, so that the public could see them as you and I do today.
Many discoveries made elsewhere in the solar system, including Mercury and Mars, are related to the study of moon rocks. New discoveries are still being made.
So what we learned from Apollo 11 is how to get to the moon. The mission worked really well from the start to finish, which is evidence in itself. It was a technical and technological demonstration to that we, or rather Americans, are able to send someone to the moon and bring them back alive and well. So this is a first discovery.
Lunar samples are being handed out this year to scientists across France for further study to mark the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission. Sending astronauts back to the moon is a goal US President Donald Trump has set for the future.
A Colombian town is hoping to brew up 2 world records, one for the world's largest cup of coffee and the second for the largest coffee tasting.
In the heart of Colombia's coffee-growing capital, the town of Chinchina is brewing up 20 tons of coffee in one giant cup. But it's not going to be easy. The town will have to wait a little longer to receive its crown. A representative from the Guinness World Record says further evidence is needed before announcing an official award.
For this first cup of coffee, a minimum of 18,012 liters of coffee is necessary. For the second, we need a minimum of 739 people that fulfill all the requirements at the time they enter the area. So there are 2 completely different requirements that need to wait a little bit because the evidence is very detailed, since we are talking about food-related records.
The event organizers say the world record attempts are an effort to promote the local coffee culture and farmers.
For this cup of coffee, a minimum of 18,012 liters of coffee is necessary. For the second, we need a minimum of 739 people that fulfill all the requirements at the time they enter the area. So there are 2 completely different records in terms of requirements that need to wait a little bit because the evidence is very detailed since we're talking about food-related records.
Colombia is the 4th largest economy in Latin America and one of the largest coffee exporters in the world.
As the war rages in Libya, fewer European rescue vessels are patrolling its coastal waters. Now, Tunisian fishermen are rescuing migrants stranded at sea.
Libyans continue to flee to Europe, hoping to escape its civil war. It's a dangerous journey, and humanitarian assistance from Europe has dwindled. With no European rescue ships to pull shipwrecked migrants from the water, Tunisian fishing trawlers have stepped in.
The first ones to deal with migrants are the fishermen. Why? Because a fishing area is a crossing point for them. When they leave Libya, heading to Lampedusa, meaning they can only reach Lampedusa by passing through our fishing area.
Fishing boat crews help in whatever way they can. Sometimes all they can do is alert the authorities. But abandoning their original mission of catching fish can come at a high price.
The loss for us is that we have to stop our work to save them and return on land with them. It's hard to finish our work. For example, we work a day or 2. If we find them on the second day, we have worked 1 night. If we find them on the first night, we have to return with them.
The fishermen never abandon migrants in distress at sea. Those they save often say they were ignored by other vessels.
Fishermen are practically the only cops at sea who alert. Sometimes they cannot afford to take 90 people. Therefore, they alert the maritime authorities. Migrants tell us that a lot of boats are passing by on the high seas. They ask for help, but the boats pass by them and do not help. And that's a crime too.
The situation is far from ideal. Lives have been lost as a result.
They must put some ship or some boat for rescue people. In sea, we was 85 people. Is died. We survived 16 people. Others is died. because of rescue boat. Wasn't have there anyone to help us.
With no end in sight for Libya's chaos, the fishermen have their work cut out for them in the near future.
Now, as the danger of a worldwide ecological collapse looms, one Japanese town is striving to make a difference. Kamihatsu, a small community in southwestern Shikoku Island, plans to have zero waste by 2022.
Plastic, paper, metal. In the Japanese town of Kamikatsu, sorting rubbish isn't that simple. Residents face a mind-boggling 45 categories to sort their garbage as the town aims to be zero waste by 2020.
We now have more than 40 categories, and I confess that I am a bit lost. So what I'm doing is I'm clumsily separating the glass, cans, paper, magazines, and I bring it to the center where I receive the sorting.
Efforts to cut back waste began in 2002 when the town had to shut down one of its incinerators. It no longer met strict emission standards. Instead, residents decided to recycle their waste.
Before to do this job, I used to buy new if it didn't work anymore or if it was damaged, but my philosophy changed considerably.
Kamikatsu and its 1,500 residents are already close to their goal, recycling 80% of its waste. They say it would be difficult for a bigger town to do the same. Unfortunately, there has been little reduction in consumption.
I think the consumers can reduce the consumption up to a certain point, but it also depends on the producers to produce less. Otherwise, it won't solve the issue.
Japan has introduced a plan to reduce plastic waste by 1/4 by 2030, but it won't come into effect before 2020 and time is running out.
Let's start off business news with the British Exchequer, who says UK-listed firms will become the first foreign companies to be able to list in mainland China under a new stock link. The UK Chancellor Philip Hammond will officially launch the London-Shanghai Stock Connect scheme today. The stock link will allow global investors to access shares in Chinese companies. The UK government said the project will open up British firms to new investors. Firms will sell shares through dual listings on the Shanghai and London stock exchanges. It will also allow companies from each country to raise capital in the other. China is expected to have more than $17 trillion assets under management by 2030. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. You're all caught up now. Thanks very much for watching this bulletin here at Indus News.